I try to use my stamps when scrapbooking, but I find I'm just using something faded into the background, and then maybe a small design scattered here and there. I would love to make my favourite stamps more of a feature on my pages, but I'm not sure how to compose the rest of the page. Glitter Girl, can you help?
Of course I can. Today I'm going to work with one of the bigger stamps from my collection, and I don't have a lot of large single image stamps. I tend to buy sets that have lots of smaller pieces, and I wanted to show you an example of how you can really make a big stamp prominent on a scrapbook page, even on a 12 by 12 page. And so I'm going with this one, which is a coffee cup. So to pull something that would coordinate with that, I have these two photos from the Starbucks in Epcot, and everything is just going to go from there. I'm going to be using this stamp with two photos, and I'll show you how this formula for creating a page works really well with two photos, although you can change it up. I find that it works really easily with two pictures. And I chose one paper to get everything started, and this is from Cosmo Cricut Upcycle, which is an older paper, 2011. And I chose it because this was a good match here, where I've got the darker and lighter shades. They're right here. And also because I thought it looked a little bit in tune with that kind of futuristic, but futuristic as imagined in the past kind of look that Epcot has. And I know that that's going to be a really important part of how I'm journaling about Epcot, because the last time I had been to Disney World before we went this past year was for the grand opening. Way back when I was a little girl. My family won a trip to Disney World and the grand opening of Epcot. So when I was a kid, I really remembered it being so futuristic. And then when I got there as an adult, I'm like, it looks like the 80s! Amazing! And so I really want that to come through in my journaling about Epcot. So I chose papers that I thought had that tone. And I'm just going to be showing you one layout today, so this may not come out really obviously, but I thought I would share that with you so that if you see future pages that I'm making in this set of in this section of the album, that will kind of come together, and I have this master plan. I also know what's going to go on the facing page, and it's photos of greenery and floral pieces that are around Epcot. So I wanted to bring the floral motifs into this page. So I have pulled out a few different floral options. Some October Afternoon, some Sassafras, and these are also October Afternoon. And what I'm looking at here is that the background paper that I chose is definitely cream based. It's not white. It's definitely that aged yellowed paper. So I don't mean that it's aged from 2011. I mean it's printed that way. So I've chosen other collections that have that same soft background. So these are all cream-based papers. This is on white chipboard, but if you see, it has the cream printed on there, so there's no white halo on the florals. Okay. Other bits and pieces that I'll show you as I go, but first I want to work with the stamp so that I get it stamped and ready to use. So I want to find some cream to stamp on, and I often stamp if I'm going to do some sort of coloring in or featuring the stamp in a way like on a card or anything else. I tend to stamp on this kind of bright white ultra smooth cardstock because you get a really great stamped image. But in this case, you can see with the white against the cream, it would be quite jarring and not feel so natural. So I'm going to stamp it on cream cardstock instead. Ordinarily, I might stamp this in black ink if I was going to color it in or use it in some sort of bold detail, but because I'm using these warm tones, and also because it's coffee and whatever ink I stamp, this part is going to be that color, I'm going to stamp it in brown rather than black. We'll make it a little bit softer and less harsh than the black ink against these aged papers. And I'm not using plain cream cardstock. I'm actually using a pattern, but just a really subtle, simple pattern with this grid. And my hope is that I can then repeat that same pattern somewhere else on the page for the journaling, or maybe for some little strips for the date or something like that. And then I'm going to stamp the same design on the floral. And then I'm going to cut them apart and put them back together. I'm cutting the full cup out on the cream, including the steam. And because the steam is not something I would be able to cut right on the line, because then it would be so frail that I'd just break it. And so I'm going to use a halo in cutting the whole thing. So I start wherever I'm cutting by going a little bit outside, so that when I get to this part, it all looks about the same going around. A bit too much on the bottom, so just trim that up a bit. And then in the pattern, I just want the sleeve that's going to go across the middle. So same thing, little halo, and I'm going to go a little bit wider on the sides in hopes that it will then be wider than the cream that I've cut out. And I'm going to add brown ink to all these edges to soften it up. Just have a bit of shading so that it doesn't feel really flat. Now, you can go in any direction with the large stamped piece for this formula. So you can do a big floral piece with beautiful coloring with Copics or colored pencils or anything you like. You can do watercolor shading and make it all have shadows that are more realistic rather than just darkness around the edge. Whatever technique you enjoy and you love the look of is going to work here. The idea is that you just need one big stamped image that is going to become a centerpiece on your page that's going to go between the two photos, which is why two pictures works so well on this composition. Now, that's a really simple one to cut and piece together. You can do that same coloring technique, or same cutting and piecing back together technique, with really detailed stamps and really take your time and make something that's an absolute work of art. Likewise, you can do something that's two pieces of paper. They're both going to work, and the way we build the page around them is going to be exactly the same. My next step is going to make some little borders with a variety of different patterns that just match up with the colors in that multicolored background. And some of them are going to stay just nice small strips like this, and others I'm going to use a punch to give them a fancier edge. So this one I'm going to use this old favorite of mine, the double scallop punch. This is EK Success, and it's meant to emboss these little dots along the middle, but I find that it doesn't unless you push really, really hard, and I'm not worried about the dots, I just like the large scallop. So that's what I'm going to do with this one, and then with the floral, I'm going to give that one a smaller scalloped edge with this Fiskars border punch. If you have border punches in your stash but you haven't been using them, I'd love to hear which one is your old favorite that you could bring back to your table. What could you start punching this week? Because it's a lovely little detail to add to a page. I'm inking all the edges of my little strips that I'm going to use in the matting, and this is one of the times where I really decided how valuable ink applicators are, regardless of which size or kind that you use. And before I used an applicator, I always just went straight to the ink pad. I held the ink pad against the paper, and when you're working on straight lines, that usually works quite well, although you do get a really concentrated color, and sometimes you can cut your ink pad, which isn't great either. But trying to do a scallop or tight curves of any formation, it really just doesn't work with the ink pad. You end up getting ink here, but you can't get in here. Then you try and turn it to get the ink pad in, and everything gets creased and unhappy. So if you've still been holding off on getting something like that, I would definitely recommend it. It was something that I didn't use for ages, and then one day I did, and then I couldn't look back. I've never gone straight to the ink pad again, I don't think. Now I'm going to put together my top and bottom borders and then put the photos in the middle. So I have one extra piece that's going to go at the bottom, and then the other pieces will be the same in each group. I like to go ahead and stack up and adhere my strips before I put them on the page, just so that I can make sure that I get them in the order that I want. And I want to make sure that I have my single color with the biggest contrast on the outside edge. And these two patterns in the middle, the floral and this geometric, are where they have all of the colors just like this background paper. They don't give me that same contrast as having one of the single colored patterns on the edge. And you could do the same thing with solid color cardstock, just single color paper without a pattern at all. But I do prefer the texture that I get from using lots of patterns, and that's just a choice of which style you prefer. Yeah, so I want that higher contrast there. I could put a yellow on the outside and that would be a single colored pattern as well, but it would be closer in line with this warm background. I get more contrast if I use the brighter blue rather than the yellow, which is similar to the cream in the background. So just a case of, do you want it to be more obvious or more subtle? And if you want it to be softer and more subtle, then you would use the yellow as the outside edge instead of the turquoise. And then I can assemble this with my photos. So 2 horizontal 4x6 prints so that I can have the photos run right across the middle of the page here. And then this border at the bottom. Here's where all of this comes into play, that I can use a large stamp and really bring it into the forefront. I've made sure that in the space where the 2 photos meet, I have more empty room. So I could swap this over the other direction, but I would end up with the details of my photo in the center. And while that might work, in fact, most of the times that I make layouts, in this case, because I want to bring the stamp into the forefront of the design, I want the stamp to go here, and it's going to have all sorts of little things around the edge that's going to bring even more detail into that. So I want it to overlap onto a part of the photo that I don't mind covering up. If you don't like covering photos at all, or if your photos don't have a lot of empty space like this that you can cover, just adjust the spacing on the page. So I might bring it down here and have it overlap just a little bit. I might choose a stamp that I could put right down here and not have anything here, but I would still have it quite central on the page. And there are different ways that you can play around with the particular stamp and pictures that you've chosen. But the idea is that you'll be able to put the stamp somewhere along the line of where the 2 photos come together, so that it's not going into the background, it's not going to be something that you cover up, it's actually going to become a big focus in the middle of the page. Along with my stamped coffee cup, I want somewhere to journal, and then I want some layers that are going to make this into a really pretty piece in the middle of the page. So I'm going to cut my journaling box from this pattern paper, which is exactly the same thing that I used to stamp the coffee cup. And I want these 2 pieces to be near each other, but not exactly next to each other. I don't want them, I don't want the 2 patterns touching, basically. I want something in between there. So I want to bring in a floral that's different than this small floral, but similar type of colors. So I'm going to use this sassafras floral that I always love. And I have cut many pieces from it. I'm going to start with this big bundle of yellow blossoms here in the middle. And I think I'll actually cut all of this, including the blue and the pink. And then I may need to pull it back and make it smaller, but it might work to have the whole thing across. So I'm just going to cut this out with my scissors and then layer it in. With this big piece then, I can start layering things here in the middle. So yeah, it's great big. It's huge. But I'm going to use that large piece right there because I've got lots of open blurry space here. And this is going to go there in the middle. This gives me a way to tuck my journaling card underneath all of these things. And I quite like the idea of my journaling card, once it's underneath here, being right about here. It'll be underneath those flowers and underneath this scallop. Because then I have 3 vertical pieces here and they're forming this little triangle. I might even bring a little tiny piece of this grid up to this corner as well because I think that would be a nice way to emphasize that. So this is going to go underneath here. Pick up all these pieces. Yep. And I also wanted to bring in some different texture and a floral that would match this. So I have some chipboard here that brings in the red with the pink. And I think that will be best over the top there. So why don't I go ahead and get the coffee cup stuck. And I don't want that little bit of yellow showing. I want that covered up. And I'm working right with that line in the middle of the photos. And then these little flowers can go right under there. I might move one of these pop dots to tuck them under just a little bit more. There we go. That gives me a little bit more potential to write. If it were over here and I could only put, a couple letters there, it makes it really difficult for the writing to flow across the journaling box. But not so bad here. So that stamp is still really there in the forefront, and this gives me a great place to put my title so that my title can run up to the cup and then my journaling can run down here. I also did pull out this strip of the little coffee cups, but I have a feeling, okay, here's where it's going to work. I didn't like it as a big strip like this, even if I put it underneath there. It just felt like the gray with the white was a little bit too jarring amongst all the color, but the reason I had pulled it out in the first place is because there is a gray polka dot in this. What I do like, however, is having just a little bit of it. So instead of having this big long strip, I think I can run just a few little pieces of it. And then that mimics the idea that there's just a little bit of gray in that background paper. Likewise, there's going to be just a little bit of gray in the embellishment. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this into a few pieces. And I plan on putting one up here with a little bit of the ledger paper. And put one over here with my title. And I think my next step then is to figure out what lettering and where it's going to fit in here. And I have also kept this little extra flower. I've got more if I want to put one up here as well. Going to embrace that whole idea of more pink and more turquoise for the title. So I'm going to use some October Afternoon hot pink little letter tiles here. And then some corrugated turquoise stickers for the larger word in the title. I know that I want it to run into the coffee cup basically, so I'm going to, now that I have my coffee spelt out on there, I'm going to run the rest from the end and figure out where it will come from there. Oops. So if I run along the top here, this should work to keep it nice and orderly. Okay, so why do I do that? That fits nicely. The large word fits nicely there, so now I just need to build above that. And I'm going to tuck the end of this right into the floral piece there. I've got that ever so slightly offset so that it's not completely in line with the yellow, but it's really close. And then I found some even smaller little letter blocks. And in fact, I might need to run this up a little bit so that I can do 2 lines. Let's see. This is a little different look than I was imagining because these little letter stickers are not all the same size, and this one are a bit more orderly. And not perfectly orderly. I haven't done the coffee one in a straight line, so hopefully there's a happy medium there. But sometimes you just gotta roll with what you find and what works. There we go. Coffee from the future. And my journaling here, I'm just trying to decide, should I do that in black or in brown or in gray? Gray would be better still. All the important stuff is on the page now, and it's just a case of having a bit of fun with the smaller embellishments to finish it all off. So I'm going to bring in that yellow flower here to this little corner. I want to make sure that you can still tell that those are coffee cups. And I want to bring in something to pick up on this little Mickey that's in the writing on the cup, because that's picked up on my journaling. So I'm going to use, I quite often use this pattern paper with enamel dots in the center of the flowers, but this time I'm also going to add the 2 smaller dots to make the little Mickey. See if I can get it just right. There we go. And then up to here. So I wanted to bring in that bit of ledger paper again. Can tuck this underneath the scallops just like I did with the journaling box. And then I have coffee cups as well. Maybe I tuck these into the smaller scallop at the front. Yep. And then find a flower here that I could, now I've got one there at this edge here. So I think this is going to go behind up here. Yep. And bring back those dots. I don't have the possibility of doing another blue Mickey, but I can do, I want to emphasize the yellow or just stick with blue. I think I'll just bring in these 2 little blue ones. Yep. And I don't want to do gold or silver mist on this one because I've got that combination of yellow and gray. And the yellow and the warmth of the cream pattern paper makes me want to go with gold, but the gray makes me want to go with silver. So I actually am just going to leave out gold and silver metallics entirely, and just stick with color and not anything super shiny. I know that can be a bit shocking for Glitter Girl, but there we go. I want to put in the date up here, and then maybe find one small stamp that I could go ahead and emphasize the fact that there's a big stamp here by using the same ink to stamp some small little sentiments in the areas of embellishment. For a moment, I was worried that I had no small coffee stamps, and then I remembered things. I do have a small coffee stamp. I have this Studio Calico one. So I'm going to use the brown ink that I used here to stamp this one straight into these little embellishment clusters 3 times. So 1 here. And I'm not worrying about stamping straight onto the background because if it doesn't work perfectly, all I'll do is cut out more of the flowers and put layers underneath there to cover it up. So once here, and then 1 spot here, and these will both fit quite nicely. But this top spot, I've got a little, actually, yeah, it'll work there in the corner. Just looking for little corners to tuck the stamp into. So I've got that little one there, and this little edge here, and here I'm using this little space there. That's just trying to make the stamp kind of fit into those smaller spots. So that emphasizes my brown ink again, but I do want to bring that into the design by not having it feel quite so isolated. And that means that because the way all of these things are connected is with layers that overlap, I need something that kind of overlaps with that. So I can bring in some little enamel hearts in this case. And I was going to use a large one here, but because I've got the Mickey head there, I'm going to use this small, itty bitty one. And then I'll use a bigger one up here at the top. Oop, not quite in the right spot. There we go. That's a bit better. And this is a spot where, having mist, if I added in little mist droplets over these groupings, and that would have the stamp not feel quite as isolated as well, but I am still pretty determined that I don't want to use gold or silver here. I was looking at the idea of using white because there is that tiny little bit of white here, and there's definitely white in the pictures, but I'm worried that that might be too high contrast. And I think brown would be too heavy. I'm not sure if I have a pale gray mist, but that might work well, so I'm going to have a check. I do. I have this one, the Tintype from October Afternoon, so I know it will go well with the October Afternoon colors, and I think it will go well with the others as well, but I just want to give it a little check first, because I haven't used this one in a long time, and the ones that you see me use often, I know exactly what they're going to look like on the page, so I want to make sure that I'm going to like this one. I'm going to go with just a tiny bit of the gray. There we go. And that is everything that I'm going to put on this one. So you can use this idea with any large stamp by looking for a place where you can put it right in the middle of 2 photos. And you can decide by looking at this one whether you think you would want your stamp to overlap this much of the photo or come down the page further. And if you needed more space, you could always put the photos up a little bit more to pull the stamp and the rest of the embellishment down. But if you bring it in with your title and your journaling, the stamp is going to be right there in the middle without feeling like, hey, my whole page is about, look at this stamp. So you want to strike that balance, and by putting it with the other 2 things, so you've got your title running into that and your journaling running into that, and then these 2 running in with your photos, you've got all the important stuff linked there together, even though you've got that stamped embellishment where you really want to use that stamp and feel like it links in with your story right there in the center. If you want to do this sort of idea with multiple photos, then look at making everything else a little bit smaller. You could do 4 landscape photos right across the middle, but it would push everything down here. Or of course you could use smaller prints, so I could have 4 portrait photos all the way across there in 3x4 prints. Or I could make a grid in the middle if I needed to have maybe a collage of squares or something like this, where I've got kind of a mosaic of 9 square images, for example, in the middle, and I could have the stamped piece at the bottom of that grid. And then everything below the grid would be the title and the embellishment and the journaling. So you can play around with that idea, but the concept is that if you want to bring that stamp into the forefront, you need to try and put it in the middle of the photos and see if that helps you find a place for it on your page. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you soon, and subscribe if you want to get notifications every time there's a new video. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye!